For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi on the talking point today. Our guest from Washington, D.C., Seema Sirohi, who's a columnist with the Economic Times. And from Tokyo, Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's been a former advisor to former Prime Minister Shinzō Abe's cabinet in Japan. Professor Taniguchi in Japan. Good to see you, sir, and thank you for staying up so late in the night.
Not at all. It's my pleasure. Good to see you again, Amitabh.
And Seema, thanks for waking up on a Friday morning and giving us time on StratNews Global.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start straight away with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's speech, much awaited speech that he made on China policy. Just picked up some excerpts, and then I'll come to you. This is what Antony Blinken had to say at Washington University.
Even as President Putin's war continues, we will remain focused on the most serious long-term challenge to the international order, and that's posed by the People's Republic of China. China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. Beijing's vision would move us away from the universal values that have sustained so much of the world's progress over the past 75 years. But rather than using its power to reinforce and revitalize the laws, the agreements, the principles, the institutions that enabled its success so that other countries can benefit from them too, Beijing is undermining them. Under President Xi, the ruling Chinese Communist Party has become more repressive at home and more aggressive abroad. We cannot rely on Beijing to change its trajectory. So, we will shape the strategic environment around Beijing to advance our vision for an open, inclusive international system.
Much awaited China policy speech was delayed once, I think, because the Secretary of State had COVID. But now, while it reiterates China as being the most serious long-term threat, some analysts feel the US is being too soft on Beijing. What's your take?
You're asking?
Seema, yeah.
Okay. So basically, it's a long-awaited speech, parts of which were made public, off and on in other speeches. But the basic concepts are align, invest, and compete with China. There was a recognition that China is their long-term challenge despite the war in Ukraine. So the core of the speech is that the US would try to shape the strategic environment around China by bringing in allies and partners. It's not seeking the overthrow of the Communist Party. I think I noted that Blinken admitted that China has enormous strategic leverage because its economy is integrated with so many of the big countries' economies. So they have enormous power through their economic might. Blinken also sort of reiterated the strategic ambiguity, the policy of strategic ambiguity around Taiwan, to walk back what President Biden had said in Tokyo. But more and more people here in Washington are saying that if President Biden has said this 3 times, this is what he's thinking. And if a push comes to shove, the US is not going to stand by. So that's that. The problem with this whole China policy is that the corporate lobbyists who are working on Capitol Hill, they so far have been successful in delaying the passage of the big China bill that the administration has been working on. So we don't know where ultimately the policy will land. Amitabh?
Sure. Professor Taniguchi, Beijing has reacted predictably, calling it smearing, the speech that is, or the policy. How do you view the US, in Blinken's word, this invest, align, compete strategy when it comes to China?
I agree with what Seema said, in the sense that the United States has sort of confessed that the United States cannot do everything alone by itself. So it is once again a reiteration about the dire need for the United States to work together with allies and partners, among which he didn't say, but Japan is the most important, because obviously Japan hosts the largest military footprint of the United States. So I think it's educational to the American audience and to the international audience, because we're all obsessed with the war in Ukraine, the war forged by the Russians against Ukraine. But he needed to say that the long-term challenge is with China. It's so much obvious, but it needs to be told again, primarily to the American audience, but to the international audience as well. So China obviously is 10 times as large as Russia, and it's still growing. On Taiwan, true, Blinken reiterated the famous strategic ambiguity rhetoric, but I gather its nuance has a little bit changed, because he said something like, while our policy has not changed, what has changed is Beijing's growing coercion. It's almost to say, we're not changing, but you are the one that's changing, which causes us to respond in a different way. I think China has actually taken a look at that specific implication.
Sure. We could flesh that out a little bit. But Seema, just going to the Quad Summit, the fourth one, second in person in Tokyo. We've seen 3 changes of government among countries that are part of the Quad. It's still well on track. But some analysts feel it's time to develop security teeth. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, see, the fact that they've had 4 meetings, 2 virtual and 2 in person since the Biden administration came in, is quite significant. And in terms of developing a harder edge to the agenda, I think not everybody is on board, at least not explicitly. So the way I look at it, the Malabar exercises that the same 4 countries do is where they discuss and flesh out their security ideas, I'm guessing. But in the Quad, they want to remain completely positive and have, a focus on bringing public goods to the region, to the Indo-Pacific region. I think primarily to make it more attractive to the ASEAN countries who don't know where to lean. They don't want to make a choice between the US and China, at least not yet. So I think the agenda of the Quad, it's fine if it remains focused. They keep fleshing it out. They keep adding new subjects. And this time they inaugurated the Maritime Domain Awareness Partnership and the Economic Partnership, both of which are solid steps forward. Amitabh?
Sure. I mean, we'll talk about both those initiatives a little bit more, but overall, Professor, I keep bringing it up whenever we talk to you, because ex-Prime Minister Abe's visionary Conference of Two Seas 2007 speech to Indian Parliament, I mean, you just can't forget that and look back at it. Prime Minister Modi and Abe met. He's met other ex-Prime Ministers as well during the summit visit. Are you satisfied, though, Professor, with this incremental evolution of the Quad?
It has to be incremental, Amitabh, because this is a long-term project. The Chinese are fighting a long game because they don't have anything like a political calendar, election calendar. We have shown this time that Quad institution has overcome some of the changes of the government. Yes, we do have political calendars, election calendars. Notwithstanding, we could continue to stand firm together. That's what actually the new Prime Minister from Australia said about Quad, which is very much true. The other thing that's developed was to have included the issue of illegal fishing. That's been among the biggest concerns for littoral nations of South China Sea and East China Sea, but more South China Sea. So it's an incentive to open Quad for the countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines. I think that's also a very good development. Once again, let me just say this is a long-term project. I know members of the press and members of the think tank community are restless bunch of people. They want to have short-term headline-grabbing results, but Quad must be developed gradually but steadily by those four leaders, no matter how many elections they have gone through.
What Professor Taniguchi was talking about, Seema, this Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. I mean, what's out in the public, we do know is, information fusion centers here in Gurgaon, in Singapore, and the Pacific are going to be linked. But those are all non-confidential data. It's white shipping. It may be a step, as Professor Taniguchi is saying, because many reports say China is reportedly responsible for up to 80 to 90% of IUU or illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. How do you see this IPMDA? Because there's also something that we don't know about, which is sharing of space data that is picked up from space. I don't know whether they are actually coalescing or whether they're separate silos.
So, in background briefings here, senior administration officials said that this was a very major demand by other Asian countries, that they wanted to have more awareness, maritime domain awareness about what was happening in their territorial waters, in their exclusive economic zones, etc. So the US decided to respond and develop this concept. So there is a complete buy-in by other Asian countries into this concept. They will share data about dark shipping. So now these are ships, right, that they switch off their signals so they can pass by and nobody knows. So they're going to share all this data so that illegal cargo they might be carrying can be confiscated, I presume. So this is a very positive thing that everybody apparently really wanted, and they have delivered. And that is, again, I would say, is to make other Asian countries happier with this idea of the big Indo-Pacific concept, to look at the United States as an alternative to China, which I don't think shares anything with anybody.
Professor, these are pictures we had taken in 2018 at the IFC-IOR in Gurgaon. That's one of the fusion centers that will be linked. An interview that we had also taken there. But like I said, most of this data is neither confidential or sensitive. It's open, but it's collated. And now these linkages between Singapore, Delhi, and the Pacific. Do you see this as a stepping stone gradually to give security teeth in the maritime domain? And if you can also take a question from one of our viewers, Professor Matara, who says, will the ASEAN countries still be on board if the Quad becomes a military alliance?
Well, it's a far-fetched question. Quad is not going to be an Asian NATO or something like that anytime soon. It's a vehicle to be invested into continuously so that it could run. It could continue to run for the next decade, even decades. The idea of maritime surveillance is something that I like very much because it tells our shared opponent that you are being watched, the signal that you are being watched above you. The joint capabilities of surveillance include a lot of satellite technologies, a lot of Singit technologies, and they're effectively saying that the United States, Japan, Australia, India, all those countries put together their maritime surveillance technologies, i.e., technologies sustained by space, satellite technologies. I think that's very much a powerful message to be taken seriously by the Chinese, because if you detect illicit, illegal fishing activities, given the shallowness of the South China Sea, you can say effectively the activities of attack submarines of the Chinese Navy can also be detected. That's the implication.
Let me just go on to the economic aspect now. IPEF, Seema, I mean, even in the briefings that Foreign Secretary Quatra has given here, I mean, he has mentioned unsustainable debt as a reference to, of course, China. But how do you see this IPEF? I mean, it's certainly not an alternative to RCEP or CCTP, though why the US is not in CPTPP is probably why they are trying to push this as an alternative to BRI. But is it credible, Seema?
See, so far there's been, I would say this is probably the weakest concept the US put forward, because there's no increased access to the US market. US domestic politics is not going to be able to carry that right now. So the administration is very conscious of that. So what they have done is taken a very flexible approach. They have 4 areas. Any country, the countries that are participating can pick and choose. So I think the flexible approach is very suitable for a country like India. But Southeast Asian countries might feel a bit disappointed. And critics here in Washington also have pointed out that this is at best a decision to talk about talks at this stage. So where this goes, we just have to see. In terms of RCEP, it's further along. Japan wanted the US to join the CPTPP, but there is no appetite here right now, because the progressives in the Democratic Party, the labor unions here, even Republicans with their America First concept, they don't want any jobs going abroad or any more, sort of loss of. They just don't want to open up anymore in terms of market access.
Sure. Professor Matara, thanks you for your last answer, for clearly enunciating what the Quad is. But just coming back to IPF now, Fiji has become the 14th country to join it, though negotiations will take place. This and that $50 billion, which is being looked at in terms of infrastructure support over 5 years, is it really a concrete alternative, Professor, to the BRI?
Belt and Road Initiative, didn't you gather, has lost steam. Very few people are talking about BRI anymore, because the Chinese themselves have lost confidence about it because of the oppositions and reservations that they see coming up from all corners of the world. Sri Lanka is a living testimony of that failure. So BRI is passé in my view. And so you don't have to compete with BRI. The IPEF, the beauty of IPEF is that it succeeded in including India. So that's what it is all about. And the United States and India are all joining a new framework, which I think is entitled to bring the democratic torch in the economic framework as high as possible. And that's what was lacking, both from TPP and from RCEP. TPP failed in bringing in the United States. As Seema pointed out, there's no prospect at the moment for the United States to join TPP. And RCEP, about RCEP, to tell you the truth, Japan desired very much that India would effectively become very much an important inaugural member of RCEP. But I do understand the reservations and anxieties of Indian people. So IPEF, IPEF has got many good points. The United States is there from the beginning. India is there from the beginning. And so we're here to talk about advanced issues like data exchanges and transparency of data exchanges and privacy of data exchanges and 21st century's challenges. It's okay, isn't it, for multiple organizations to stay there and to serve different purposes.
Just going to take some viewer questions. Seema, if you would like to take this one. This is from Kedar Bide, who says, as no other Quad country shares land borders with China, what capability augmentation will Quad provide to India along land borders?
Well, as we saw during the Galwan crisis, the US did help India with real-time intelligence sharing and some winter equipment and things like that, which is out in the public domain. But there was a lot more that we don't know about. So there are discussions about that, but we are just not privy to it. This probably is happening at a bilateral level with the US, between India and the US, and the 2+2 dialogue that took place recently. This was a major component in that. So Quad per se may not, publicly help or articulate anything about the land border problems of India and China, but I think it would happen at a bilateral level.
Sure. Professor, if you could take this question from Vivek Balachandar, who says, is there a possibility for increased joint research and production of submarines or other naval defense technologies between India and Japan?
This has got to take place. I think the leaders from India and Japan, Narendra Modi and Fumio Kishida, should have talked about this. I think they must have talked about this. And it's going to benefit both India and Japan must open itself for further cooperation. The challenge here is more on the Japanese side, because the Japanese defense industry and the Japanese defense ministry have had zero experiences in cooperating with countries such as India to develop cutting-edge technologies. It's slowly changing. The next generation fighter aircraft, it's being talked about, is going to be developed jointly between BAE Systems of the UK and Japan's Mitsubishi. So gradually Japan is going to do things like that. I do have the same view. India and Japan must develop cutting-edge military technologies more together.
A question for both of you. I'll go to Seema first. This is from 124 Just Madness. Seema says, given the economic stakes that Japan and the US have in the Chinese economy and the huge deficit that India has, how can they diversify their economic interests to nations like India?
See, that is the million-dollar question, right? It's a very important question given the integration of the Chinese economy in all the major economies of the world. How are you going to decouple, if at all? So I think what the strategy appears to be is pick certain sectors in which the US can reestablish or just take the lead, like whether it's semiconductors or AI or what Quad calls the critical and emerging technologies, and that would be the strategy going forward. I think the biggest challenge here in the US is the corporate interests who do not want to decouple it. I mean, it's as simple as that. And also domestically, for a democratic country, is very difficult to uh, uh, to start producing and not be dependent on cheap Chinese goods. Americans are, very addicted to dollar socks, $1 socks. So it's going to take a long time, I think.
Professor Taniguchi, if you want to take that question.
Yes. Later this year, Xi Jinping is going to be elected the third time as the party leader. And it's going to be a 5-year term. So 2027, he is going to be standing, if you like, for the party leadership again. The 5-year period is going to be a window in which Xi Jinping must do as much as possible to take back Taiwan. It is not a question of whether or not China is going to take back Taiwan. The question is how soon. And that plan, I think, is going to be implemented within the next 5 years. The Japanese businesses are faced with that kind of dire danger. So now is the time for the Japanese industrial leaders to think twice about the country risk of China. I am urging them to not send family members along with those business people working in China. In Shanghai, you have 2,000 Japanese people locked in, and they could not get out of their apartment houses. That was enough is enough. And so there's a much lessened appetite among the Japanese industrial leaders to continue to send their companies' members to China. What would be the alternative? A big market, growing economy, burgeoning middle class market, very much young population. That's India, which is why the Japanese government, Shinzō Abe and others, have chosen to invest into the future of India. What Japan does with India is all about future, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. So that's what I could say.
Seema, Professor has brought up Taiwan. You mentioned it earlier as well. Biden has at least thrice, I think, been taken on a record on saying that the US will defend Taiwan, and then the White House or other officials have walked him back. But the professor had earlier said that there was a nuance in what Blinken said. He said even though the US is following its one China policy, China has changed its policy. How do you see Taiwan?
Well, I think I agree with the professor completely. There is a subtle shift, and Biden's repeated, declarations, whether you want to call them gaffes or mistakes, I no longer believe they are gaffes. It clearly shows discussions in the White House are probably around this prospect, as the professor pointed out, that in the next 5 years, Xi Jinping has to make his move vis-a-vis Taiwan. So for me, it's very hard to imagine that the United States will not do anything. and just watch. I really don't know what will happen, but in terms, they will arm Taiwan to the best of their capability. And, there is bipartisan sort of support that you have to defend Taiwan if Xi Jinping were to make a military move.
Professor, I mean, on Taiwan, if you want to flesh out your thoughts, Japan has been very strong in its statements. We've seen over the last few months defense budgets going up, more aggressive weaponry being thought of being purchased. As Matara says, Dr. Taniguchi is the right guest to shed some light on Japan's sharp pivot on defense matters.
Well, I would like to say that it's going to be very much a sharp shift. But, this is a country of things going on in a gradual manner. We're talking about increasing defense budget from something that is 1.24% as opposed to the GDP, the nation's GDP, to the to the NATO standard of 2% as opposed to GDP. And so it's going to happen over the next 5 years. So 5 years from now, you will have been able to say that Japan has come quite a far. But also the legal arrangements are such that the United States military assets are all the time 24/7 under the protection provided by the Japanese armed forces. So both militaries have become much, much more seamless than they were 10 years ago. If you say that that's a sharp shift, yes, indeed, it's been a sharp shift. But more has to be done before it's too late, because the Chinese are increasing their military budget by 5, 6, 7% annually. No nation can catch up with that rapidity anymore. Even the United States could not catch up with that pace.
It's pretty incredible, Seema, that we're reaching the end of this discussion and we haven't mentioned Russia and Ukraine, which is the center of all geopolitical discussion nowadays, but I'll have to bring that up, I guess. The Quad, Seema, seems to have dealt with the differences that India has vis-a-vis the other three treaty allies on Russia and Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But apart from the administration, how is it seen in Washington?
So there is some criticism from key Democrats on Capitol Hill about India's position. It's very nuanced, but I think there's greater understanding from when the war started, or the first couple of weeks when India refused to condemn the invasion. But now, with greater dissemination of information on Capitol Hill, there's greater understanding. And the fact has gone home that Indian dependence on Russian defense equipment happened because nobody in the West was willing to sell key technologies to India at the time. And officially they've admitted that as much, So, but there are few commentators who I would call very ill-informed, and kind of they indulge in sort of gotcha analysis, that every time they find, India has bought some oil or done anything, they bring it up on Twitter. But these are very few in number. I would say more or less there's great understanding. The fact that the Quad joint statement did not mention, the word Russia is significant. It was a concession to the Indian position. But President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida used their opening statements to condemn the invasion by Russia. But at least, so Quad to me, the overriding principle seems to be pragmatism, the great effort to present a united front and managing the differences behind closed doors.
Professor, Japan has been very strong on Russia, even joining the sanctions regime. As Abhik Mahato points out here, Professor, India needs to pose tough questions to Russia regarding their bombers hovering around the Japanese Isles, especially with India being there. There is also obviously a reference to the joint Russian-Chinese nuclear-capable bombers that were flown there, and subsequently Japan and the US also held exercises. But if you want to take that and answer a question that was unthinkable at one stage for Japan, will Japan ever consider the nuclear option as a deterrence?
Nuclear option in the sense that Japan could share nuclear bombs with the United States, just as Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Belgium have done since the Cold War era. No one is talking about developing nuclear arsenal from within, but there's been a discussion ignited again by former Prime Minister Shinzō Abe within the political circle in Tokyo of the value and necessity of Japan hosting nuclear bombs jointly with the United States in such a manner as Germany and others have done in Europe.
Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi and Seema Sirohi, absolute pleasure having you on Talking Point on StratNews Global. Thank you, one for staying up late and one for getting up early.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure's all ours. And just a reminder to our viewers, we're putting up a UPI payment ID on the screen where you can help support us. And as soon as the stream ends as well, you can click and buy YouTube Super Thanks. That's a heart icon right next to the thumbs up that you press to like this video. You've been watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.